At the end of your life, what will be your legacy? What will you leave behind for future generations? For the world, join the World Messenger, Izabela Lundberg, each week as she brings you a new distinguished guest from the business, sports, or entertainment world to share their success, their struggles, and their lessons. They will share their insights into current hot topics that affect everyone. Izabela facilitates an intimate, vulnerable environment to find the true value of humanity and real leadership. Are you ready for your legacy? The legacy that matters?
Hello, my beautiful friends. It's Izabela Lundberg here, the World Messenger, and I am inviting you for another epic episode of Legacy Leader Show. Today we have someone who is joining me just the next door state from my favorite Colorado and state that I love, which is Utah, with amazing mountains and gorgeous backgrounds. But someone that actually is known as ghostwriter, has phenomenal background in writing and depicting and storytelling, right? But also it's really passionate about creating a value, impact, influence, and positivity. But most than anything through communication, written and verbal communication. And what best way to learn on this show how to position for success than with Bruce Kasanoff. Bruce, how are you?
I'm great, Izabela. Thank you for inviting me to join you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I mean, you have such an intriguing background, from graduating from Wharton School to being involved with a lot of interesting companies, and always the forefront of that breaks of innovation and that uncomfortable growth, right? Then a lot of times we resist and don't want to embody, but then to really beautiful way of how we deliver that and how do we package and turn into tremendous success. And beside, you are obviously influencer on LinkedIn, being appointed in that role long time ago through the LinkedIn itself, and have such a great, not only following, but people that really appreciate your art and craft. So Bruce, with that in mind, before all of this happened, just tell us a little bit about your background and how did you even get into the passion of writing, communication, and realizing this huge opportunity that is never dying?
So I think I kicking and screaming, I got pushed by the universe into it, not to be too new age, meaning that, so in the last 10 years, everything I do revolves around writing. Although I actually think of it as everything I do revolves around conversations I have with my clients who are all entrepreneurs. And then I write. But the conversations and the questions I ask people are really the core of what I do, and writing is a way to do that. I used to think, if you asked me 15 years ago what I wanted to do, it's not politically correct to say this anymore because he's been, revealed to be not that great a person. But I used to watch the Charlie Rose show where he sat around a table with a black background and he had conversations with influential people, or just interesting people. And I just think, I want to do that. That's the most fascinating thing. And that's essentially what I do today. And the way that I do it is without no TV camera, I do it with writing. And so I love that. I mean, I've written for years. I wrote a book my first book in 2001, but I never, if you asked me at 30, I wouldn't have said I was a writer at all.
So interesting. I love what you just shared there, how sometimes some shows or people and personas or just in situations influence us. I was like, this is so intriguing. And we don't necessarily initially feel like, oh, we could do that too.
Right.
But how do that curiosity sparks so many great ideas and help us to reveal ourselves, right? And our true passion.
I think it takes a really long time for some people, myself included, to figure out who you really are and what. So for example, I started working in television stations and radio. I worked for WGBH, the public TV station in Boston, for 4 years. And at that time, right out of college, I had to decide, am I creative or am I business? Because there were two different paths in the station. And I remember thinking about maybe I should go into be an intern in, Nova or this old house or some, and I remember being uncomfortable with that I felt almost like an imposter to do that. And so I went in the business end, and now, I mean, probably 10, 15, 10 years ago, I think it dawned on me, no, I was completely, I mean, I went to Wharton. I'm not, I understand business. I like business, but I'm a creator, not a business type, and so it took me 45 years to figure that out.
And I don't blame you, because a lot of us, as you said, are going through that journey, and creativity in a full-fledged way was not really exercised and practiced these most recent years with virtualization, with gamification, with so many elements of it became more cherished, accepted, and in high demand, right? And in order to be further developed, you need to know and recognize, and you need to nurture that. And not many organizations, and let alone even universities, had that.
Right.
As we were,
Or people. I mean, I think the people
yes.
don't get it either. Like, so for example, when I was in business school, I wrote a humor column for the newspaper, and meaning the Wharton Journal. And so that's a pretty big clue that, I like writing, I'm good at it, it's something that gives me pleasure. And somehow I then thought, but I thought, like, that's my hobby, or that's my, I never, so I just think that when it comes to self-awareness, we can be clueless, just like completely, like somebody else could say, like, I remember, oh, who was it? Ben Platt, the guy who, what's the Broadway show he's in? He just did the movie adaptation, Dear Evan Hansen, and he was being interviewed on the radio, and he talked about when he came out to his parents that he was gay, which he did in a phone conversation because he didn't want them to hear. He was away at camp and all this, and he related basically being like, how are they going to react when will they be shocked, and talking to his mom and dad, who were like, tell us something we don't know, it's perfectly fine, and we're 100% behind you. But you think in your head, like, oh my God, like, I can't admit that I have a desire to whatever, be creative, be, different, be. So.
Yes. And it's so interesting. And I love that we're touching on this, how many things changed just in recent decades, right? Not only because of innovation and technology alone, but demands and the speed and expectations, and then also how we interact, and what's more allowed, or what is more now acceptable, what is more now inclusive, right? All of those things. And I think for many of us that are also very creative, tapping into that creativity, it definitely not only opportunity to shine, but truly to bring the craft to the light, which you do in a phenomenal ways. Obviously, as a ghostwriter, you can say, oh, that piece was actually written by me, but you also do your own fair share.
But that doesn't work so well in my business. No, it's me.
No, but it's so interesting, because I would love to depict that, because I remember people pitching, it's like, you should let me know if you need help. It's different when you have the idea, like, I love like helping to wordsmith, craft, polish, gain clarity. I mean, obviously, English is my sixth language. So somebody like you, I'm like, yeah, no brainer, right? But to me, I'm always had this conflict, because when even early stages of my writing, before LinkedIn changed so much, when I was actually featured in many groups on LinkedIn with my original first blog, first 100 that I wrote. And I remember that I was like, I'm determined not to be the victim of, not being born here, not going through early education here, but to really master the English the way I can master, so I can write, right? And then own that. And I remember people as like, is somebody writing for you? I'm like, no. And there was always this conflict with people that I will hear. I was like, you should, as a leader, stand behind 100%, who you are. It's all about you and your voice. So do you mind picking a little bit about that? I wouldn't say stigma, but very different approaches where people are still feeling like, even I'm too busy or too lazy, or this is not my forte, or I don't care, versus truly, genuinely, I'm struggling because English is not my first language, or I am struggling because I am not 100% yet clear. And that is something that I see still happening for so many people.
Well, first of all, I want to say that you make me feel so humble when you say that English is your sixth language, and probably the worst experience of my life, other than personal tragedy, has been 10th grade French class, for me, where I have no ability in other languages. So I just think that for anybody switch languages and then write is unbelievable. So I want to acknowledge that. But I mean, I think there are all sorts of reasons. For example, two of my three kids, who are all grown, when they were in elementary school and high school, could not handwrite and take notes in class.
Wow.
Both highly intelligent, creative people they could type, but they could not handwrite. And who knows what it is about the brain that could not. So I had to fight for a year or so each to get them. Actually, the second time was easy because they have this, nobody wants to put a laptop into school because they're worried the kids are going to be surfing the web. And so they invented this thing that has no web connectivity, but remembers. So I get that people are different, and we have, some people like to talk. Some people, if you put a blank sheet of paper in front of them, they are crazy. Some people, are on their fifth or sixth language. So there's all sorts of reasons. I don't, it's interesting. I don't think of myself as helping people to write. I don't really, that thought doesn't even enter my mind. I think of the things that people, so I usually have, let's say, 4 or 5 conversations a day with clients, and each one is a conversation. And what I think, when I think about the reasons that they use me for help, I think number one is that they don't know how to focus. A lot of writing and creativity is, what's the nugget here that's really interesting to me, but also to other people. And if you say to people, so for example, the most terrifying thing to let's call it a 14-year-old in school, is if your teacher says to you, write a 2-page paper on anything you want. And people do not, that's terrifying. They do not know how to do that. If you say to somebody, which they always do, read the 10th chapter of this book and say which of the 2 characters you feel most aligned with and why, people can write that paper. So they need help narrowing, and then what I find when I have conversations with people is that they have too much context. So like, what's in your head? You think, oh, there's 3 things I could write about, or whatever it is, and they have a hard time keeping people, helping people to have context. What are you talking about and why? And doing it at the proper pace so it keeps people interested. So meaning, like, let's say you talk about your experience early in life and how you went from one culture to another. I'm making this up, but and it might not be apparent to you that you're losing somebody, that they don't know that you just said in a sentence something that you could write a book about. And maybe you should write something that's much narrower, or you should write about what it felt like the first time you felt you didn't understand the language and you had to, understand it, or whatever it is. And so I think it's that focus and clarity that people struggle with, and that, I mean, I struggle with. I think, like, how do I get someone? You start to think about all this social media, writing a book, writing a story. You're diverting somebody from the 2,000 other things that they could do, and it's just hard. It's hard to figure out, how can I, gently, but in a positive way, pull someone into this story I want to share.
Wow, that is so powerful. And I totally agree with you. Lack of focus, lack of concentration, too many competing ideas. Obviously, technology has a little bit of side effects too, right? How much we're on the phones and using devices, how we're plugged in, that is so hard for people also now to plug out and have a clarity of idea. I'm fascinated by the demand, by the need. Definitely, I know it's all time high, but in the same time, I'm just curious. It's like, how do you? Obviously, you have your craft and art. How do you break that down and help them to express themselves? But with that clarity, do you mind sharing a little bit? Because so many people truly are struggling with clarity. What will be some suggestions and advice for people that are seeking that clarity? How to gain it and how to pause and level set with that?
I mean, it's the toughest question, that there is. That there's a woman I know, Tasha Eurich, who has written a couple of books. Most recent, whose title I forget at the moment, but is basically, she touches on self-awareness, and she says how if you ask people, are they self-aware, 90% say yes. And if you measure self-awareness, 10 or 15% of people are self-aware. So the vast majority of us think we're self-aware, and we're not. And so when you say clarity over, for example, telling a story, well, it's hard to have clarity over the story you want to tell if you're kind of clueless about who you are, why you do things, And so I kind of think that the communication and writing is largely about who am I, what's important to me, what matters most. And so the willingness to remove the veneer. Another friend of mine, Paul Corona, he runs the leadership program at the Kellogg School, and he talks about the behind the bio story. So here's your, oh, I'm president of this, I wrote this book, I did this, whatever, and he was like, great, okay, great, but who are you really? What really caused you to be the person you are today? And your ability to tap into that, this is me, not him now, to write on that level, to write not as the vice president of sales for Cisco, but to write as, as Bill or Susan, who's a 47-year-old who has, yeah, she's good at this, but this is what she really cares about. It's that. It's the more human you are, the more compelling your stories will be, and the more. So self-awareness is partially, how do other people react to me, and how do I perceive myself, and how do other people react to me is critical, kind of in storytelling. And is everything I say going over people's heads or not? So paying attention to, let's say you put something out there and nobody responds. Well, don't do the same strategy again, because maybe there's a small number of people in your network, so you should get 5 and you get none. I pay a lot of attention to that, not because I need to have 1,000 likes every time, but I want to help somebody or have something that I wrote or said resonate. So I pay attention to, without that. Sometimes you'll get people that like or comment, and you can tell it's they're being nice, they're being, polite or something, versus somebody. The last couple of days, I've had a few people who have written me a personal note, in response to something I put online. And someone said, hey, I went through a similar thing. He was talking about, I got divorced a couple of years ago, and I'd be happy to share an anecdote that really helped me. And I'm going to write back to him and say, sure, that'd be great. But, that's evidence that you're doing something that connects with other people. So you just keep trying to do that by being genuine. And then when it works, learn from it and do it again, do more of it. Don't publish the same exact thing, but be that sense of open. And open doesn't have to be, I tell you unbelievably personal things. It just means I tell you who I really am and what really matters to me.
Yeah, that vulnerability, that raw vulnerability, the process, the way we think, the way we show up, right? And that definitely has great sense, because it's like reading your posts. It's like, oh, I have a good sense. I already, in a way, indirectly or directly know you, and that's where you also build the trust, where you also build connection, and ultimately that leads to influence. But I love what you mentioned earlier. Tasha is one of the Coloradans here,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
and I had also chance to check some of her work, and through the other people to really hear about some great stuff she's working on and doing. But the beauty is, I love when you're also referencing how actually we all have a chance and opportunity to adjust our game, right? If things are not working, if we're not happy with them, how can we change them in a way that is meaningful to us? And then how to build upon and expand and go further, right? Because a lot of people right now are paralyzed to even try. And that is, again, really interesting phenomena, how much we hold ourselves back due to fears and different factors, but also how we're conditioned, the way we're educated generationally. It's like, you can't fail. It's expected from you every single time to get it right. And writing, expressing yourself, your ideas, it's not about getting it right first time, isn't it?
Right. Actually, as you were talking, it occurred to me that I rushed past something I should have said. So on my website, which is Kasanoff, it's my last name, kasanoff.com, Tasha inspired me to create a section called Increase Your Influence. And influence, I mean, in a positive way, not like, be an influencer. And because she has a group called the Tasha 10, where she's taken these really unbelievably impressive people around the world and have brought them together to be supportive. And I'm not sure exactly how she would pay it forward, basically. It's an outgrowth of a Marshall Goldsmith initiative. And
Yes.
And so I did that. Well, I was inspired by her. I presented it to her, Tasha 10, and it's still up on the website. It's called Increase Your Influence. If you go there, you can see it. And there's 10 different principles in each one. And it kind of answers a lot of the questions we talked about so far, but in a way that there's an example, there's a principle and an example. And so it was my attempt to make a referenceable set of answers to this type of question. How do we influence others in a positive direction, in a genuine way? So that's my best attempt to do it.
That's awesome, and I love that model, and it's and I love also avenues of paying forward, because that's what's really all about, right? How do we pass our knowledge? How do we impact people as while we're still around? Of course, written words will always be there to echo after we are gone, and through our books, through our blogs, whatever.
I feel like you're talking a lot about after we're gone. It's making me sad, but okay.
No. But because from legacy standpoint, a lot of people think that legacy only gets fulfilled when somebody passes away and pass something onto, the world. The reality is you make an impact and influence and legacy right now, and that is the beauty, because a lot of people don't realize that how intentional every action and every step of the way actually builds that momentum and opportunity, and how huge that can be, and domino effect and consistency around that, right? So that's why I wanted to defer, because a lot of times we wait for something magical or major to be in order to celebrate or recognize or whatever, but reality is what we do consistently, even those small little steps that build up upon something greater and bigger. With that in mind, I'm really curious about, obviously, we've seen people having different values, dealing with very different approaches, but ultimately what we're still seeing consistently, communication issues, right? And I'm seeing this in the boardroom, I'm seeing this in organizations and different sectors. That doesn't matter where the thing organizationally fits. It's like we do talk, but are we truly communicating? Are we really connecting? And what are we communicating? Either it's through emails or any types of written word, let alone conversations, sessions that we have. So do you mind sharing a little bit from your valuable perspective, how you helping and navigating others to be more, again, clear in their intent and communication, and process around that? Anything you can suggest?
Right. So I want to call out somebody for this because I think she's better than I am at this. So a friend of mine is Molly Chang. It's the Swiss spelling, Tschang. And she has it's a website and a video series and a radio show / podcast called Say It Skillfully. So sayitskillfully.com. And I helped her in the early stages of conceptualizing, like how does she use her skills, but she's done it ever since. And she's one of the few people who have given me permission to say that, meaning she had this vision that she didn't know how to act on of helping people say what needed to be said. So in an organization, in a relationship, and Say It Skillfully ended up to be the embodiment of that, because Say It Skillfully started as a video series of Molly essentially presenting a problem. What do you do if your boss thinks he's being so funny and supportive, but he's really being obnoxious and belittling people? How do you tell him that? And she would set that up in a 90-second video, and then in 30 or 40 seconds, say exactly how you would say that to your boss. So model the way to do it. And to the degree that I helped her to develop that, it was me listening to Molly, in many conversations, explain to me or somebody else, well, what do you do in that situation? And I would say to her, I still don't know how to say, I don't know the 35 seconds to say. I still would be terrified to walk into my boss's office and do that. And so that single insight, which is that we understand the principle, but we don't understand the actual words, and so we stumble and we mess it all up. And in watching, if I would encourage anybody to go there and watch, 5 or 10 of Molly's videos. It'll take you 20 minutes in total. And what I realized that she does is she says like 5 things in 35 seconds.
Wow.
So she says, she doesn't jump right in and say, Bill, you're offending people. She never says that. She says, I want to do a bad job at this, watch her videos, but she basically says, Bill, I want you to know I'm 100% on board with what you're trying to do, and the idea that we're all working together to achieve this goal. And I know that you're 100% committed, and I appreciate that. And I know you've always had my back, and I appreciate that. I want to make you aware of something in a positive spirit, to help us all do that together. And I think that you are not fully aware of the times that you say something that causes someone discomfort that you thought was amusing or witty, and it doesn't land that way. And I noticed that you don't see that it doesn't land that way, and therefore you're not aware of some of the negative consequences. And so by doing it like that, by breaking it down, by thinking, it comes back to, I said, a few minutes ago about context, by saying like just enough to say, I'm not attacking you. I don't hate you. I don't think you're a moron. I'm not offended personally by anything you're doing. I want you to succeed, but there's something you need to know. Like, for example, my really shorthand way of doing with my clients is I have a tendency to say the first time we talk, and then a couple of times thereafter say, I apologize, I'm very direct, but it's always in a constructive way, or intended in a constructive way. And almost always the people I work with say, no, please do that. And we have a relationship in which I can say, I have no idea what that meant that you just said. And they don't get offended and they say, they try again. And they say, well, why didn't you get, whatever. And so it's knowing that the other person knowing that you're not attacking them. You don't think they're stupid. You don't think they're sexist. You don't, whatever it is that is the hot button. Most of us rush past. We don't take the time to say, I want you to know I'm not attacking you, and then say something.
Yeah. That we're quick to respond, and then the listening part sometimes is not only get diluted but also doesn't really frame properly, and we see as a result so many relationships detrimentally being affected, personally and professionally. And communication is still number one issue, what I see in leadership as well as overall in business setting, but honestly in personal life as well, right? Because you have to meet people where they are, understand their capabilities and capacity, but also emotionally what triggers them, and what comes out through conversations. And
Well,
often,
you have to do all that, and yet each of us is somewhat flawed, and each of us has our own emotions, and we're impatient, and we're disappointed, and we're, whatever. So you have to do that as a person who is carrying your own baggage. So it's easy to say the principle, but then like, why weren't you more, sensitive in the, like, I was exhausted by the time I got to the 6 o'clock, and so it's really hard in actual real life to do a lot of things that, we know, yeah, I should do that. It's hard, which is why, you don't hit send on your email, without thinking, and you don't, like, if somebody makes you angry, you don't like pick up the phone and call them, and I write a lot of things that I put, not in the drawer, but in my Google Drive that I never publish or never send to anybody, but it makes me feel better, and it makes me realize, okay, you're being kind of a jerk, so now, just pick up the phone and say you're sorry,
sometimes we need a process, and that's so mature also to know this triggers me, or this is where vulnerability comes in from the behavioral standpoint. As a behavioralist, I see that all the time. That's why it's so important, again, knowing where people are. But I love how you said how important it is to preface this before we say something. Hey, Bruce, I just want to quickly to know, rough few days on many fronts. I hear you. We have a deadline. How do we execute this? Or I really feel like that is great long-term strategy. We need something that we can move the needle right now. What would you recommend? And it just the tone, obviously choice of words, selection, right? It gives such a different delivery and different intention. And then you don't have to fake it till you make it to tell me where you're coming from, but it matches with your energy, matches with your intention, matches with your words, as well as obviously your body language, right? And a lot of times people feel like, why do we struggle? Why we're still having this push-pull? Because we're having competing thoughts, ideas, and we're also having very competing agenda. So if you want to just resolve something peacefully, and I wanted to get my way no matter what, it's going to create a clash, and more audience we have, there's going to be more challenging to navigate and deal with that, right? So with the communication, I feel like we see so much happening right now. And I just love the way you mentioned how it's important to preface. Kudos of great work that you did with the lady that you just mentioned. And I'm definitely going to check out.
Molly Chang, yeah.
Yes. But I think I've seen it, some of her videos in the past when you mentioned her brand and all of that. But see, those are the things that stand out. So it's like, how do you tweak and polish when somebody maybe gets 95% right? How you get that 5% that are going to make huge game changer financially, visibility wise, credibility wise, right? Impact and influence wise.
Well, so that's why I exist, meaning that I'm trying to think of the right way to say this. So like, I'm the opposite of like a grammar geek, or people talk about like Oxford commas, and I like fall asleep. I have no interest in any of that stuff.
Great.
But I do think that there are times when, if you just cut off the first sentence in a post or piece, like, for example, most people do not understand in a way that they act on, that the first 5 seconds of what you say truly matters. That people, so when I was first in the LinkedIn influencer program, and there's like 100 of us in it, and the executive editor sent me an email and he said, I really like what you're writing, but your headlines make people think, and when you have 2,000 choices in front of you, you will not click on the one that makes you think. Like, it's not a good thing. That it should be obvious. This is like, for example, one of my best headlines was $75,000 buys happiness, more doesn't. Based on the study that says, after a certain point, more money doesn't make you happier, because that headline is a good hook and it tells you what I'm writing about. And so whereas people generally say, I don't know, I was jogging the other day, and I got to thinking that, blah, 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 blah. And then like in the third paragraph, they actually say what might be interesting to somebody. And so a lot of times people have, if you let almost anybody, if you give them enough room to say, what is it that you're trying to communicate? They can say in a compelling way what they're trying to communicate, but they don't start with it. Or they come in, and like one of my key principles is one message at a time. And so if this is the one thing I'm going to do, and I don't care if you want to, you have to get 3 approvals from your president, do it one at a time, unless he or she is completely like, give me the whole plan and I will do it. But it's just too much for people. Like, one more thing, like if I was trying to sell a software system, that's all I want. I want to walk out of the office having sold the system. That's it. I don't want to also get them to buy the service or whatever. And so to me, I do a lot of pruning, of just saying, can we start with the most interesting, most enticing thing, that or way to say what you're doing. So like, I don't know, if somebody says, I want to tell you about the day I almost died. It's a much more compelling opening than, customer satisfaction is so important. Let's talk about customer satisfaction. You may end up in the same place, but it's how do I get you into the conversation?
That is so powerful. And I love what you said, that we are programmed almost to explain and justify. And it's also very interesting to see male versus female dynamics, right? Specifically in corporate America, and where communication, it's like almost like that expected politeness and excuse before even asking for something, or expecting for something to happen, and how we're programmed to culturally play the roles, right? And then generationally, now we're seeing for first time 5 generations in workforce, and then we have wisdom from all of those that we can extract and highlight. But then again, how do we relate to everyone? How do we speak that we are truly heard, or very well read, or very well understood?
Well, so I have something that long before I was a writer that I thought about, which was, so I used to be in the personalization space, meaning using technology, personalized customer relationships, and which was kind of back in the Amazon getting going days. And to do that, I used to give a lot of speeches, and I tried to come up with a definition of intelligence that was specific to what the work we were doing. And what I came up with was, intelligence is having something meaningful or valuable to say to a person, and knowing the difference between what's valuable to one person versus another person. And it is that difference. So for example, and the analogy I used to make was, let's say that a nice young couple moves next door to you, and they come out, you meet them on the street, and you're talking to them, and they say, oh, what do you do? What does your husband do? Oh, what's your dog's name? And you think they were lovely, and then you come out the next day and you see them, and they say, oh, what do you do? What does your husband do? What's your dog's name? They think that was kind of odd. And then the next day they do the same thing again. It's like, we need to be able to remember what makes one person different than another. What are your values? If you want to talk about legacy and long-term meaning and what, and someone else wants to crack jokes, I can do either one, but it really helps to know the difference between you and to know, you're not like let's do fart jokes, and somebody else is like very intellect. It's like, what is it that makes you you? And that's intelligence. And when we evidence it, when, for example, if you tip off very early, let's say you see someone after 6 months and you remember that their daughter was just starting middle school, and you say, how did Clara do? Is she adjusted to school? You don't need to go for 2 hours on that topic, but you just signaled that you listen and you pay attention and you care about them. And there again is something a lot of times that we skip. You say, like, I don't want to get into a big conversation. You're not necessarily getting into a big conversation. You're signaling that you see the other person. And I think that's really important.
I love that. And everybody wants to be heard, right? But most than anything, they want to be accepted, understood. And with that in mind, either it's through their craft professionally, and getting better, and only fool things that they know it all and they don't need to change or make any adjustments, right? And with everything that is going on around us, more than ever we need to do that. And obviously for you, with such amazing trajectory of your career and how many people you are still helping and continue to help, I'm curious, Bruce, I mean, you've accomplished so much. Obviously you already have very strong established legacy. As you said, that you tweaked it, that you changed, that you over the last even decade crafted more into this beautiful way of helping people to gain the value, clarity, impact, influence through wordsmithing, and also distilling those ideas into brilliant state that others can consume. So I'm curious, what is next in your world? And also, what would you like your legacy to be? What would you like to be remembered by?
Big question. Just a little question.
Of course.
I'll tell you that so I have a this is my afternoon for names. I have a friend, his name's Charles Vogel, VOGL. He wrote the book The Art of Conversation. He started a little beta group. I'm in like the second or third wave of it, of people who were trying to foster community in much more significant way than I am. And I joined it. I asked to join it because I'm thinking about community. That's what I'm thinking about as now. And not like a community like I want to get 100,000 followers way, like a real community supporting each other. And I'm wrestling with what kind of community I want to be instrumental in nurturing, coming to pass and nurture. And I think that the biggest legacy is always, do you influence in some positive way how other people, act, because they touched you or whatever. In many cases, it can be, they don't even know that you had, like example, like, oh, well, let's have a monument to you, or let's do what Bruce said, or anything. Like, I think it's more powerful sometimes when they have no clue that, somebody founded this, 150 years ago, and I don't know who it was, but meanwhile, like 10,000 people have participated in it. And so I'm thinking community. It's really interesting when you break it down. What, for example, community, according to Charles, means there's some initiation, which is largely to give you certainty that you are in a community and you belong to it. And he gave an example the other week of a really big company that he was consulting with, that the person who was essentially unofficially running the program didn't think he was a member of the community. He just thought he was staff, and it wasn't. And Charles said, are you kidding me? Like, and that's how Charles realized that, wow, we got a problem. We have to do something to formalize this because he thought, well, we're bringing in all these thought leaders from around the world. Well, I'm not one of them. I'm just the administrator. And Charles was like, no, you're the essential player here. And so it's that sort of thing. We don't realize sometimes how fundamental and basic the challenges are. We don't think we belong to be here. We don't think we're part of this. We don't think it's our responsibility to make it better, either through saying something or doing something different. Those are the things I pay attention to now.
I love that. It's so ironic that I also look at the models of communities and tribes, or, how certain companies with their brands created this cult in a way, positive, obviously, like, Peloton, for example, whatever, people that are so gung-ho, passionate and driven, and exhibiting that. And I it's more than sense of belonging, more than just that tribal, alignment, right, of what we believe in, and synchronicities and opportunities for us to thrive in such a different, meaningful way. But I think that is such a great way of passing on something also for generations, because we sense of community and sense of belonging, it's one of the biggest issues that people felt during the current time, right?
Well, I think it's still completely a huge growing problem. So it's not going to go away with COVID. It's a huge problem.
It's just something that wake us more and make it more prominent in our own psyche, right? To see more visible, right?
Well, I think the issue, like, all these books have written about it, that we're more connected and we're less connected than ever. We don't actually have communities. We have, like, a lot of people we're connected to, but we don't have, do we have someone you can call in the middle of the night if you need help?
And someone that we trust unconditionally, someone that's going to act in best interest for us, that's not going to jeopardize their own agenda.
Or you are willing to, like, if you call me, I'm going to help you, period. Of course, and that. And I think, for example, parent-children relationships, adult children, a lot of times parents say, well, I'll always be there for you. And the kid says, no, I don't know that. You're not, that's not your history. And so it's all sorts of stuff like that.
Yeah. That is very powerful. And I'm totally with you, because as we need those more meaningful, impactful connections, more human connections, more vulnerability, more that real raw and rawness of what is to be human and navigating complexities around us, but also all the challenges that are presented. And then how do we exercise to be more compassionate, more kind, more inclusive, and more supportive? And I love that. That is fantastic legacy to reflect on and definitely to carve, just because, again, that's why people commit suicides. That's why people live in very dysfunctional relationships, and also never fulfill their dreams, never really gain clarity, and never gain the path forward and actualize their potential. So kudos for helping people not only to actualize their potential, gain visibility, clarity, influence, and impact, but also wordsmithing. And I know I don't downplaying by any means, but clarity of the words and communication, I think, again, it's the crown of all of this. So kudos for sharing that. And do you mind, for audience and listeners, share how they can engage with you? I mean, who do you typically engage? I know you're spending a lot of times helping successful entrepreneurs to get even better, also larger companies. And what is the path to get to Bruce?
Right. So it's easy. You just go to Kasanoff.com, my last name, and I have a contact form there. And if anybody who puts anything in, I respond to. And I would say that I'm so biased towards individuals and not companies. Like, although companies pay me, I'm always working with a person, just always. And I also, even if I'm just talking to somebody, I'm always talking to a person. And that's probably my greatest lesson, like meaning I learned, not I came up with it, is that, because I talk to my clients, or I mean, some of them they have a 2-person company, but some of them have, they've raised $200 million this year or whatever it is. And I just see again and again that they're all people, they're all human beings. They all have like, so I was on whatever, the Today Show, but my daughter threw up in my lap, it's just like, everybody's a human being. Everybody has, your kids are never impressed with what you've done. And you're just, so I love, I don't know, anybody wants to say anything. One of the things that happens when you publish as much as I do is people assume you are so busy that you couldn't possibly answer anything. And some people try and, cultivate that. And I don't think I've ever been so busy that I couldn't answer somebody. Maybe it might take me, instead of an hour, it might take me a day, but, I don't really understand that part. So.
That is amazing. And I love that because you're not operating from ego and you're approachable. Obviously, you on the Legacy Leader Show. We have this wonderful conversation. We're depicting some stuff that can help others. But also, I agree, because a lot of times people, the posture that are too busy or too this or too that, they're not there for the right reason to begin with.
Yeah.
And it's just a fortunate waste of time, right? But they don't know how much they actually shoot themselves in the foot. But reality is that when we have C-suites executives that are leading billions of dollars portfolios, and they do find a time or they find to support people or communities, I feel like that is the new trajectory that we're all aiming and desiring. So it's just great to see you pioneering in that space and leading the way.
Okay. I don't feel like a pioneer. I just feel like I try and like be human, but yeah.
Yeah, and blazing the paths, absolutely. So, what would you like to leave the audience with? Some of your wisdom, obviously, from all of these experiences that are struggling either with clarity or communication, or just in general being vulnerable human and just leading with where they're at right now. Because
So I would be really simple, and this is from, I mentioned Paul Corona at Kellogg. I would leave you with something that he says constantly, is ask more questions and listen. I mean, that is 100% the formula for having a better life, connecting with people better, ironically having your voice be heard, because I can get what I want across by asking better questions and listening. So if I do what you're doing today, and what you've done a great job of, just ask questions, listen. Like, for example, the difference between what you've done today and what many people do who are doing a podcast or an interview is you actually have listened to what I've said and you built on what I said. You didn't go and say, okay, well, here's question 42, because I wrote down the 42 questions and they're disconnected. And people understand that. There's a huge difference when you listen and then you say something. So you've indicated to me and to everyone else that you're actually paying attention. You're actually thinking about the conversation as a back and forth. That is so critical. And people who do it have better relationships, because it's like you indicate that you care, you pay attention. This is valuable to you. You're learning, you're imparting also, insight and knowledge. For example, the ability to ask another intelligent question based on what was just said is a tremendously valuable skill. And so I just think those are the real superpowers that are underutilized so much of the time. And if you do that, you have plenty to share with other people, plenty of value to add. I can add value by asking you a question that causes you to share something that I didn't know what you were going to say, but I know you're really good at something. So I give you the opportunity and I just added value. I mean, it's so fundamental to me to do that. And most people miss that opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much for highlighting that. And I cannot agree more, specifically as we're dialoguing with more people in business settings and decision making and everything else, right? And when that is the disconnect, it's hard. But when it's not, when it's such a great connection and when you really feel like that genuine mutual interest of success or understanding and then building upon, that is where the mojo is. And that could go and add a lot of zeros in the end. That can, right? Fantastic, Bruce. This was awesome. I really appreciate your time and opportunity to share on legacy leaders with us today. And we will definitely check in on you down the road in a few months. But for audience, again, for everyone to see you, and your website is kasanoff.com. We'll definitely make sure that it's known. And everybody, please, please, please connect with Bruce on LinkedIn. That's the platform that is most trusted. This is where he's thriving, where he's visible, and where you can really learn how his brain work, how he wordsmiths, how he polished things, how he tells the stories, and how he truly impacts and influences people. So, Bruce, wish you a fantastic remainder of the day and chat soon.
Thank you, Izabela. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Legacy Leader Show. If you enjoyed the content and had a positive experience, then please leave us a positive rating. In addition, leave us a positive review whenever you are listening on whatever platform there might be. Make sure your friends and family also know about the benefit and value that we provide and what we have to offer. Cheers.